The wind howled like a wounded animal across the Montana plains, driving sheets of snow against the weathered walls of Jed Hartwell's ranch house. He stood at the frost-covered window, watching the storm gather strength as darkness fell. Another winter alone, another season of silence broken only by the creak of old timber and the mournful cry of the wind. It had been a year since the fire, a year since he'd buried what remained of his wife Sarah and their daughter Emma beneath the old cottonwood tree on the hill. The charred ruins of the original house still stood like a blackened skeleton against the snow, a monument to everything he'd lost. He'd built this new place with his own hands, smaller, simpler, just enough for a man who no longer believed in tomorrow. Jed pulled on his heavy coat and wrapped a woolen scarf around his face. The horses needed tending, storm or no storm. At 35, he moved like a man 20 years older, shoulders bent not from age but from the weight of grief that had settled into his bones like winter cold. The barn door fought him, ice having sealed it shut. He yanked hard, cursing under his breath as it finally gave way. The horses nickered softly, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He moved mechanically through the evening routine, hay, water, a pat on each flank. These simple tasks were all that anchored him to the world of the living. It was while checking the old storage barn, the one he rarely used anymore, that he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm, something between a cough and a sob. Muffled, but unmistakably human. His hand went instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip. Rustlers sometimes use the storm as cover, though what they'd want with his meager holdings, he couldn't imagine. He pushed open the barn door slowly, peering into the darkness. "Who's there?" His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by months of disuse. "Show yourself." The sound came again, from behind the stack of old feed sacks in the corner. He lit the lantern hanging by the door, golden light spilling across dusty floorboards and forgotten farm equipment. Moving cautiously, he rounded the corner and stopped short. A woman huddled there, wrapped in a thin, torn blanket that did nothing against the cold. Snow clung to her dark hair, which had come loose from its pins and hung in frozen strands around her face. She looked up at him with eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue and full of a desperation he recognized all too well. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Please don't. I mean no harm." Jed lowered his hand from his gun, though he didn't step closer. "What are you doing in my barn?" She tried to stand but swayed dangerously, one hand clutching the wall for support. I was walking to Mercy's Bend. Got caught in the storm. Saw your barn." Her words trailed off as violent shivers racked her thin frame. "Walking?" He couldn't hide his disbelief. "In this weather? From where?" "The stage road, about 5 miles back." She pulled the inadequate blanket tighter. "There was trouble. I had to leave quickly." He noticed then what he'd missed before, the bruise darkening her left cheekbone, the way she held her right arm against her body, the dark stains on her dress that might have been blood. His jaw tightened. Whatever had happened to her, it hadn't been by choice. "You hurt?" She shook her head quickly. Too quickly. "Just cold. So cold." Jed stood there, torn between the habits of basic human decency and the walls he'd built around what remained of his heart. The woman was clearly in bad shape. She'd die out here if he turned her away. But letting her in meant, what? Conversation? Caring? Things he'd sworn off when he'd laid Sarah and Emma in the ground. Another violent gust rattled the barn walls, making the decision for him. "Can you walk to the house?" Hope flickered in those pale eyes. "Yes, I think so." He didn't offer his arm, but he stayed close as she struggled to her feet. She was taller than he'd expected, though thin as a rail. Her dress, once fine wool by the look of it, hung in tatters. Whatever she'd been through had been recent and brutal. The walk to the house felt like miles through the driving snow. Twice she stumbled, and twice he caught her elbow, steadying her without comment. By the time they reached the porch, she could barely stand. Inside, the warmth hit them like a physical force. She made a small sound of relief, swaying where she stood. Jed guided her to the chair nearest the potbelly stove, then busied himself stoking the fire higher. "Thank you," she said softly. My name is Clara Whitmore." He grunted acknowledgement but didn't offer his own name. Instead, he filled the kettle and set it on the stove, then rummaged in the cupboard for something, anything. That might help. He found an old bottle of whiskey and poured a measure into a tin cup. "Drink this, slowly." She took the cup with shaking hands, sipping carefully. Color began to return to her cheeks, though the shivers continued. In the lamplight, he could see her more clearly. Mid-20s, he guessed, with fine features beneath the dirt and exhaustion. Her hands, though roughened by work, showed signs of having once been soft, a lady fallen on hard times. "I can pay," she said suddenly, misreading his scrutiny. "Not money. But I can work. I can cook, clean." She paused, seeming to gather courage. "And keep warm through the winter." The words hung in the air between them. Jed felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the stove. "That's not necessary. I'm not—" She stopped, took a breath. "I'm not offering what you might think. I'm a widow. My husband was a minister in Kansas. We were traveling to Montana when we were attacked by road agents. They killed him, took everything. I've been walking for 3 days. The matter-of-fact way she recited her tragedy hit him harder than tears would have. He knew that tone, the careful distance people put between themselves and unbearable loss. "There's soup," he said gruffly. "And bread. It's not much. It's more than I've had in days." He heated the leftover stew while she sat silent by the stove. The domestic scene felt wrong, like wearing another man's clothes. Sarah had sat in that very chair, had warmed her hands by that same stove, but Sarah was gone, and this stranger was here, alive and in need. He set the bowl before her, noticed how she forced herself to eat slowly despite her obvious hunger. Pride, even in desperation. He respected that. "The storm won't break before morning," he said. "Maybe longer. You can sleep here by the stove." She looked up, those pale eyes studying him. "You haven't told me your name." "Jed Hartwell." "Mr. Hartwell." She set down her spoon carefully. "I meant what I said. I can work for my keep. I won't be a burden. We'll see what tomorrow brings." He fetched blankets from the chest, old quilts that Sarah had made during their first winter here. If Clara noticed his hands trembling as he laid them on the settee, she didn't comment. "I'll be in the next room," he said. "Bar the door behind me if it makes you feel safer." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell, for everything." He nodded curtly and retreated to his room, closing the door firmly behind him, but sleep wouldn't come. He lay in the darkness, listening to the storm rage outside and the quiet movements of the stranger in his house. When had another person's presence last filled these rooms? When had he last spoken so many words in a single evening? Through the thin walls, he heard her moving about, banking the fire, settling onto the settee. Then, so quiet, he almost missed it, the sound of muffled crying. He pressed his face into the pillow, trying to block it out. He had no comfort to offer, no words that wouldn't sound hollow coming from a man who'd given up on hope. But the tears continued, soft and heartbroken, until they finally faded into the exhausted sleep of someone who had nothing left to lose. Jed stared at the ceiling, remembering another woman's tears, another night when the world had ended and somehow kept spinning anyway. Outside, the blizzard raged on, sealing them in together. Two broken souls with nothing in common but their losses and the need for shelter from the storm. He didn't know it then, but in saving her, in that simple act of opening his door to a stranger, Jed Hartwell had taken the first step back toward the land of the living. The wind screamed across the empty plains, but inside the small ranch house, for the first time in a year, Jed wasn't entirely alone. Dawn came slowly, filtered through the endless veil of falling snow. Jed woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, not the bitter chicory brew he'd been making do with. For a moment, confusion gripped him. Then memory crashed back, the woman, the storm, the unexpected presence in his home. He dressed quickly and opened his door to find Clara already at work. She'd swept the floor, wiped down the rough table, and somehow coaxed his temperamental stove into producing not just coffee, but what appeared to be biscuits. She stood with her back to him, stirring something in a pot, her torn dress replaced by one of Sarah's old work dresses she must have found in the trunk. "Morning, Mr. Hartwell." She didn't turn around, as if sensing his discomfort at seeing her in his late wife's clothes. "I hope you don't mind. My dress was, well, it needed mending." He cleared his throat. "It's fine. There wasn't much in your pantry, but I found flour, some salt pork, dried beans, made what I could." She finally faced him, and he saw the bruise on her cheek had darkened to purple-black overnight. "You've been living on cold biscuits and jerky, haven't you?" It wasn't really a question. Jed shrugged and took his seat at the table. The coffee was strong and hot, better than anything he'd managed in months. The biscuits were light, golden. He ate in silence while she moved about the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone used to making do with little. "Storm's not letting up," he said finally. "I can see that." She poured herself coffee and sat across from him, moving carefully. That injured arm, he noticed, was giving her trouble. "I'm grateful for the shelter, Mr. Hartwell. Truly. How'd you come to be walking that road alone?" Clara's fingers tightened around her cup. "As I said, we were attacked. 3 men. They came out of nowhere. Shot my husband before he could even reach for his rifle. They took our wagon, our horses, everything we'd saved to start fresh in Montana." She paused, jaw working. "They took other things too, or tried to." The bruise on her face told that story clear enough. Jed felt a familiar anger stir, the kind that had once made him a man to be reckoned with, before grief had dulled all his edges. "You get away. I fought, bit one of them hard enough to draw blood. In the confusion, I ran, hid in a ravine until they gave up looking." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm not sorry for it. Not sorry for surviving. No reason you should be." They sat in companionable silence while the wind rattled the windows. After a time, Clara rose and began clearing the table, moving with the same quiet determination she'd shown the night before. Jed watched her work, noted the way she favored that right arm, the careful way she bent to avoid pulling at what were likely bruised ribs. "You need doctoring," he said abruptly. "I need work more than doctoring. Mercy's Bend. How far?" 15 miles in good weather. Impossible in this." He gestured at the window, where snow continued to fall in heavy sheets. "Even if you could make it. What then? You got people there?" Her silence was answer enough. Figured as much. He stood. Decision made. "There's horse liniment in the barn. It'll help with the bruises. And I've got cloth for binding ribs if needed." "I don't want charity. Mr. Hartwell. Ain't offering charity. You want to work, there's work enough. Place has gone to seed since." He stopped, unwilling to finish that sentence. "Just saying. You pull your weight. You can stay till the weather clears and you figure your next move." She studied him with those pale eyes, seeming to weigh his words. "All right, but we do this proper. I cook, clean, mend what needs mending. In exchange for room and board, nothing more. Suits me fine." The first days established a pattern. Clara rose before dawn, had coffee ready when he emerged from his room. She attacked the neglected house with fierce energy, scrubbing floors, washing windows, beating dust from rugs he'd forgotten existed. Jed went about his ranch work, tending cattle, repairing fences where the snow would allow, chopping endless supplies of firewood. They ate meals in relative silence, 2 people learning to exist in the same space without intruding on each other's grief. Evenings found them by the fire, him cleaning tack or mending harness, her darning socks and patching clothes with the neat, precise stitches. It was on the 4th day that the fever struck. Jed found her collapsed by the stove, burning hot to the touch despite the chill in the room. He carried her to the settee, alarmed at how light she felt in his arms. The bruises, the cold, The days of walking without food. It had all caught up with her at once. "No," she muttered, thrashing weakly. "Can't stop. They'll find me. Have to keep moving. Easy now. You're safe." The words came without thought as he fetched cool water and clean cloths. "No one's going to hurt you here." For 2 days and nights, he tended her, spooned water between her cracked lips, kept the fever down with cool compresses, held her steady when the chills shook her like a rag doll. She rambled in her delirium, about her husband Samuel, about a baby lost the previous winter, about Kansas grasslands and Sunday sermons and the dream of starting fresh in Montana's promised land. He learned her story in fragments. A minister's wife who could parse Greek and Latin, who'd taught school to farm children, who'd given up comfort and society to follow her husband's calling to the frontier. She'd lost the baby, then lost her husband, and still she'd fought to survive. On the morning of the 3rd day, her fever broke. She opened clear eyes to find him dozing in the chair beside the settee, a cold cloth still in his hand. "Mr. Hartwell?" He jerked awake. "You're back with us. How long?" 2 days. You've been fighting something fierce." She struggled to sit up, face flushing with more than fever. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be trouble." "Wasn't trouble." He helped her sit, then busied himself heating broth. "You needed tending. Anyone could see that." She was quiet while she ate, but he caught her watching him with something like wonder. Later, he understood why. In all her wandering since the attack, he was the first to offer help without trying to extract payment of one kind or another. As she recovered, their stilted conversations gradually expanded. She asked about the ranch, and he found himself explaining more than he'd intended. About building it up from nothing with Sarah, about the cattle drives, about dreams of blooded horses and expanded acres. "You'll do it again," she said one evening. "Build it back up. The land's still here, still good." He shook his head. "That was before. Different man had those dreams. Grief changes us," Clara said softly. "Doesn't mean we stop living. Just means we live differently." "That your minister husband talking?" "No, that's a woman who buried a baby and kept breathing anyway." The simple honesty of it hit him like a physical blow. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw not just another widow marking time, but someone who'd chosen to keep fighting when surrender would have been easier. That night, the storm finally began to weaken. Through the window, they could see stars appearing between the racing clouds. The road to Mercy's Bend would be clear soon. She could leave, find work in town, start the new life she'd planned. "I've been thinking," Clara said suddenly, "about what comes next. Town will be hiring. Always need teachers, seamstresses." "Yes." She paused, seemed to gather courage. "But I've been useful here, haven't I? The work's not finished. Your shirts need proper mending. The root cellar needs organizing. Come spring, there'll be a garden to plant." She trailed off, color rising in her cheeks. Jed understood what she wasn't quite saying. Town meant questions, meant judgment, meant fighting off advances from men who saw a widow as easy prey. Here, she had work and shelter and a kind of peace. "Stay as long as you need," he heard himself say. "Like you said, work's not finished." She smiled then. The first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, hinting at the woman she'd been before loss had carved those lines around her eyes. They settled into a new routine as the snow began to melt. Days of shared work, evenings of quiet companionship. She told him about teaching farm children to read, about Samuel's gentle sermons, about the baby who'd lived just 3 days. He found himself sharing too, Emma's laugh, Sarah's way with horses, the fire that had started from a knocked-over lantern and spread too fast to stop. Neither spoke of the growing ease between them, the way their grief seemed more bearable when shared across the kitchen table. Neither mentioned that Clara had stopped talking about moving on to town, or that Jed had started planning improvements to the house again. But something was building between them, tentative as spring ice. Not love, not yet. That would come later. For now, it was enough that 2 broken people had found a way to exist in the same space without drowning in their separate sorrows. The worst of winter was passing, And in the small ranch house 15 miles from Mercy's Bend, two souls who'd thought themselves beyond saving were learning that survival could be its own kind of faith. The Chinook winds came in late February, warm air from the mountains that turned the snow to slush and set the icicles dripping from the eaves. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching Jed work with the horses in the corral. He moved differently now. She noticed, still careful, still contained, but without that broken-backed slouch that had marked him when she first arrived. She turned back to her sewing, smiling slightly at the shirt in her lap. It was new, cut from cloth she'd found in the storage room and pieced together from an old pattern. His other shirts were more mend than original fabric at this point. A man needed at least one decent shirt, she reasoned, though she couldn't quite say why it mattered so much that he have something made by her hands alone. The sound of splintering wood made her look up. Through the window, she saw Jed wrestling with a section of the old barn that had finally given way under the weight of melting snow. He needed help, though he'd never ask for it. She pulled on Sarah's old work coat. She still thought of it that way, though Jed had told her to consider it hers, and made her way across the muddy yard. "Let me hold that end," she called out. He glanced up, frowning. "It's heavy work. So is hauling water and chopping kindling, but I manage those fine." She positioned herself at the fallen beam's end. On 3, together they maneuvered the broken timber aside. The old barn groaned ominously, and Jed grabbed her arm, pulling her back just as another section collapsed inward. "Whole thing's ready to come down," he muttered, still gripping her arm. "Been meaning to tear it down anyway. Too many memories." She knew without asking that this had been the original barn, the one that had stood when Sarah was alive. Everything from before the fire carried that weight, precious and painful in equal measure. "We could salvage the good wood," Clara suggested carefully. "Use it for something new. Garden beds, maybe, or a chicken coop." "We?" The word came out sharper than he'd likely intended. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks but didn't back down. "I'm still here, aren't I? Still working for my keep." He released her arm, looking away. "That's not... You've more than earned your place. You know that." "Do I?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Before he could answer, the sky opened up. Not snow this time, but rain, cold and driving. They ran for the barn. The good barn, where the horses stayed. By the time they ducked inside, both were soaked through. "Here." Jed grabbed a horse blanket from a peg. "You're shivering." She was, though not entirely from cold. The barn felt too small suddenly, too intimate with just the two of them and the horses breathing softly in their stalls. He wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Your shirt's soaked," she said, voice not quite steady. "You'll catch your death. I've survived worse. That doesn't mean you have to keep testing it." The words came out more forcefully than intended, carrying all her frustration with his stubborn self-sufficiency. "Why is it so hard for you to accept help? To accept care?" "Because I don't deserve it." The admission seemed torn from him. "I couldn't save them. Couldn't protect my own family. What right do I have to..." "To what? To be human? To let someone patch your shirts and cook your meals and worry when you work yourself to exhaustion?" Clara pushed the blanket off her shoulders, stepping closer. "You think Sarah would want this? You think she'd want you punishing yourself forever?" "Don't." His voice was rough. "You don't know what she'd want. I know she loved you. Any fool could see it in how you've kept her memory, not just the grief, but the love underneath it. A woman who earned that kind of devotion wouldn't want it turned into a hair shirt." They stood barely a foot apart now, rain drumming on the barn roof. Clara could see the war in his face, anger, grief, and something else, something that made her breath catch. "You should go back to the house," he said finally. "Get warm. We both should." But neither moved. The air between them crackled like lightning about to strike. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as Jed lifted one hand, slowly, as if fighting himself every inch. His fingers brushed her cheek, thumb ghosting over the spot where the bruise had finally faded. Clara. Just her name, but weighted with everything he couldn't say. She turned her face into his palm, eyes closing. I know we shouldn't. I know it's too soon, too complicated, too. He kissed her. It was desperate and clumsy. Two people who'd forgotten how to want, reaching for something they weren't sure they deserved. Clara's hands fisted in his wet shirt, pulling him closer. And for a moment there was nothing but this, the taste of rain and coffee, the solid warmth of him, the feeling of being alive in a way she'd thought lost forever. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. Jed stumbled backward, eyes wide with something like horror. I can't. I'm sorry. I can't. He pushed past her, out into the rain, leaving her standing alone among the curious horses. Clara pressed trembling fingers to her lips. The barn door banged in the wind, and she could see him stalking toward the house, shoulders rigid with self-recrimination. Part of her wanted to run after him, to shake him until he understood that wanting to live again wasn't a betrayal. But she knew that particular battle was one he'd have to fight himself. She waited until he'd disappeared inside before making her own way back, taking time to compose herself. When she entered the kitchen, he was gone, likely to his room. Door closed against any possibility of conversation. Clara built up the fire and started supper, movements automatic. As she worked, she noticed the new shirt she'd been making still on the table. On impulse, she picked it up and carried it to his door, leaving it folded neatly outside, a peace offering, or perhaps a promise that she wouldn't let one moment of weakness drive her away. He didn't emerge for supper. She ate alone, cleaned up, and settled by the fire with her sewing. The rain had turned to sleet, tapping against the windows like skeletal fingers. She was preparing to retire when his door finally opened. Jed stood in the doorway, wearing the new shirt. It fit perfectly, she noted with satisfaction. He cleared his throat. Thank you for this. You're welcome. He took a step into the room, then another, as if testing whether she'd bolt. When she remained seated, he lowered himself into the opposite chair. I owe you an apology. You owe me nothing. Clara kept her eyes on her sewing. We're both adults. We both know what grief can do to a person's judgment. Is that what you think, that it was just grief? Now she did look up. What else could it be? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah used to say I was the stubbornest man in Montana, said I'd rather break than bend. He stared into the fire. After they died, I thought I had broken. Thought there was nothing left but going through the motions until my time came. And now? Now there's a woman in my house who sees right through me, who won't let me drown in peace, who makes me want... He stopped, jaw working. Things I've got no right to want. Clara set aside her sewing, choosing her words carefully. We don't stop being human just because we've lost people. Wanting to live, wanting connection, that's not wrong. It feels wrong. I know. She smiled sadly. You think I don't feel it too? Every moment of peace, every time I catch myself humming while I work, there's that voice saying I should still be in mourning, still be that broken woman you found in your barn. You're nothing like that woman now. No, I'm not, because you gave me a chance to be something more than my grief. She leaned forward. Maybe it's time you gave yourself the same chance. He met her eyes then, and she saw the fear there, raw and honest. I don't know how. Neither do I, but maybe we could figure it out together. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the sleet continued its assault on the windows. Finally, Jed reached across the space between their chairs. Palm up. An invitation. Clara took his hand. They sat that way for a long time, not speaking, not moving beyond the small circles his thumb traced on her wrist. It wasn't a declaration or a promise. It was simpler than that. Two people choosing to stop running from the possibility of happiness, even if they had to learn how to walk toward it one careful step at a time. When Clara finally retired to her makeshift bed by the stove, Jed banked the fire and bid her good night. At his bedroom door, he paused. Tomorrow, If the weather clears, I'll need help tearing down that old barn." She smiled. "I'll be ready." He nodded and disappeared into his room. Clara lay in the darkness, listening to the storm gradually exhaust itself against the house. Come morning, there would be work to do, old structures to tear down, new ones to imagine. But for tonight, it was enough to know that she wasn't alone in wanting to try. The sleet turned back to rain, then finally stopped altogether, and in a small ranch house 15 miles from anywhere, 2 wounded hearts began the slow, careful work of learning to beat again. The first wagons of spring began passing on the road to Mercy's Bend, and with them came the inevitable visits from neighbors. Tom Ramsey arrived on a clear March morning, ostensibly to discuss the spring cattle drive, but with eyes sharp for gossip. Jed saw him coming from the corral and muttered a curse under his breath. Ramsey owned the spread to the south, a prosperous operation run with iron efficiency and a marked absence of Christian charity. "Hartwell." Ramsey called out, dismounting with the swagger of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. "Heard you made it through the winter all right." "Well enough." Jed didn't move to shake hands, just leaned against the fence post and waited. Ramsey's eyes swept the yard, taking in the repairs to the chicken coop, the newly organized woodpile, the kitchen garden Clara had begun marking out. His gaze lingered on the window where she could be seen moving about inside. "Also heard you took in a stray." The words were casual, but the tone made Jed's jaw tighten. Had a visitor needed shelter from the storm, Christian thing to do. "Christian," Ramsey chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "That what we're calling it? Been near 2 months by my count. Long storm." "You got a point. Ramsey?" The older man hooked his thumbs in his belt, rocking back on his heels. "Just looking out for a neighbor. Widow woman, from what I hear. No kin, no connections." "Man's got to be careful about that sort." "What sort would that be?" "The sort that shows up with nothing and leaves with everything. Seen it before. Desperate women latching onto grieving men before you know it. She's got her hooks in deep." Jed pushed off from the fence, standing to his full height. "You'll want to watch your words." No offense meant, but Ramsey's smirk said otherwise. "Just hate to see a good man taken advantage of. Your Sarah was quality. This one," he shrugged. "Well, beggars can't be choosers, I suppose." The punch came without thought, Jed's fist connecting with Ramsey's jaw with a satisfying crack. The older man went down hard, hat flying into the mud. "Get off my land." Jed's voice was deadly quiet. "And if I hear you've been spreading your poison in town, we'll have more than words." Ramsey struggled to his feet, hand pressed to his bleeding mouth. "You've lost your mind, Hartwell, over some tramp who—" Jed took a step forward. Ramsey scrambled backward, nearly falling again in his haste to reach his horse. "This isn't over," he spat, hauling himself into the saddle. "Town's going to hear about this, about what you're harboring here." He rode off in a cloud of dust and wounded pride. Jed watched him go, flexing his bruised knuckles. Behind him, the kitchen door opened. "I saw," Clara said quietly. "You shouldn't have done that. Man had it coming. That's not what I mean." She came down the steps, reaching for his hand. Her fingers were gentle as she examined the scraped knuckles. "Now there'll be talk, about us, about what I am to you. Let them talk. Jed." She looked up at him, eyes serious. "You know what they'll say. A widow and a widower, living under the same roof with no chaperone. They'll call me terrible things. They'll say I'm—" She stopped, color rising in her cheeks. "Say it. They'll say I'm earning my keep on my back." The crude words sounded wrong in her cultured voice. "And the worst part is, I can't blame them. What else are they to think?" He turned his hand to grip hers. "I know what you are. That's all that matters." "Is it?" She pulled free, wrapping her arms around herself. "You'll lose business. Neighbors will cut you off. And for what? For the sake of a woman who appeared from nowhere and has nothing to offer but the work of her hands?" "Clara, I should go." The words came out in a rush. "I've saved a little from what you've paid me, It's enough to get to Mercy's Bend. Find work there. It's better for both of us if— No. He caught her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. This is Ramsey talking, not you. Ramsey's just saying what everyone will think. Since when do we care what everyone thinks? He gentled his grip. You saved me, Clara. May not see it that way, but it's true. This house was a tomb before you came. I was just marking time until I could join Sarah and Emma. Then you showed up and suddenly there was coffee in the morning and conversation at night and a reason to see another day through. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Don't you understand? That's exactly why I have to go. You're a good man. You deserve better than the scandal I'll bring. Better? He laughed bitterly. What's better than having something to live for again? Before she could answer, they heard horses approaching, not one rider but several. Jed released her, hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. 3 riders appeared, Ramsey and 2 other men from town, including Matthew Carver, who served as both sheriff and judge when circuit court was in session. Afternoon, Jed, Carver said, dismounting slowly. He was a fair man, Jed knew, but bound by the expectations of his position. Tom here's made some accusations. Figured I'd best come out and clear things up. Nothing to clear up. Ramsey insulted a lady under my protection. He got what he deserved. Lady. Ramsey's swollen jaw made the word come out slurred. That what she told you she was? Carver held up a hand. Let's keep this civil. Ma'am, I'm going to need your name and circumstances. Clara stepped forward, chin high despite her tears. Clara Whitmore. I'm a widow. My husband was killed by road agents 2 months ago. Mr. Hartwell gave me shelter during the storm and allowed me to work for my keep since then. Work? Ramsey snorted. I'll bet she works real— Tom! Carver's voice carried warning. Ma'am, do you have any proof of your identity? Marriage papers, letters of reference? Everything was stolen in the attack. Convenient, muttered the 3rd man. Peters from the feed store. Jed moved to stand beside Clara. Her word's good enough for me, but not for the law, Carver said, not unkindly. Without proof of marriage, she's just an unmarried woman living with an unmarried man. You know what that looks like. Jed, I know it looks like Christian charity to those with eyes to see it. Pretty charity, Ramsey sneered. Widow shows up young and comely. Plays on a grieving man's sympathies. How long before she's got her name on the deed? How long before poor Jed here has an accident and she inherits everything? That's enough. Jed's hand moved to his gun. Get off my land. All of you. Carver sighed. Don't make this worse. Jed, the woman needs to come to town. Make her situation official. If she's what she says, there'll be records somewhere. Telegraph offices, church registries. Until then. He looked genuinely regretful. It doesn't look right. She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go. Then I'll have to come back with more men. Carver's hand rested on his own weapon now. Don't want that, but the law's the law. The law? Clara laughed, sharp and bitter. Where was the law when those men killed my Samuel? Where was it when they left me for dead? She looked at each man in turn. You want to know what I am? I'm a woman who lost everything and survived anyway. Who walked until her feet bled rather than lay down and die. Who found the one decent man in 100 miles, and yes, stayed when he offered shelter. If that makes me a criminal, then arrest me. Silence stretched taut as wire. Finally. Carver cleared his throat. No one's talking arrest, ma'am, just propriety. Propriety? Clara's voice dripped scorn. Will propriety feed me? Will it keep a roof over my head? Will it protect me from men who see a widow as easy prey? She moved closer to Jed. This man has shown me more honor in 2 months than the rest of the world has in 2 years. And you dare question his judgment? Ramsey opened his mouth, but Carver cut him off. Here's what we're going to do. Miss Whitmore, you've got 2 weeks to produce some proof of your claims. Marriage certificate, letters, witnesses, something. If you can't, he spread his hands, then you'll need to make other arrangements. For both your sakes. She'll have it, Jed said firmly. After they left, Clara sank onto the porch steps, face in her hands. I don't have proof. Everything burned with the wagon. Then we'll find another way. She looked up at him, eyes red but fierce. Why? Why does it matter so much to you? He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You know why. Say it. Because somewhere between that first night and now, I started needing you here. Not just for the work, for the way you hum when you're cooking, for how you scold me when I track mud inside, for the light in this house that died with Sarah and somehow came back with you. Jed, I'm not saying I love you. The words came hard. Not yet, maybe not ever the way I loved her, but I'm saying I want the chance to find out, without Ramsey and his poison, without the town's judgment, just us. Clara took his hand, studying the scraped knuckles. You hit a man for me. I'd do it again. I know. She brought his hand to her lips, kissing each bruised knuckle gently. That's what frightens me. You're willing to lose everything for an ideal, but ideals don't keep you warm at night or stand by you when the community turns its back. You're not an ideal. You're real. You're here. That's enough. She leaned into him, and he put his arm around her. They sat as the sun moved across the sky, two people caught between propriety and need, between the judgment of society and the hope of something genuine. 2 weeks, Clara murmured. What happens after 2 weeks? We'll face it when it comes. But they both knew the clock was ticking. Soon, choices would have to be made, choices that would echo through the rest of their lives. For now, though, they had this moment, this touch, this fragile understanding that what existed between them was worth fighting for, even if they couldn't yet name it. The sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and still they sat, unwilling to break the spell, knowing that tomorrow would bring its own battles, but grateful for this brief peace in the storm of other people's opinions. The days grew warmer as April arrived, bringing with it the constant anxiety of the approaching deadline. Clara threw herself into spring work with desperate energy, planting the garden, tending the chickens, mending and cleaning as if industry alone could keep the world at bay. Jed watched her push herself to exhaustion, wanted to tell her to stop, to rest, but understood the need to keep moving when standing still meant drowning in worry. It was while setting traps along the creek that disaster struck. Jed had gone out early, hoping to catch some beaver whose pelts might bring good money in town. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind that made a man glad to be alive despite everything. He'd set 3 traps and was working on the 4th when his foot slipped on the wet rocks. The fall wasn't far, but the angle was wrong. He heard something pop in his ankle before the pain hit, white-hot and blinding. When he tried to stand, the leg buckled, sending him back into the icy water with a curse that would have made a sailor blush. He dragged himself to the bank, teeth gritted against the pain. The ankle was already swelling inside his boot. 3 miles from home, no horse, and a leg that wouldn't bear weight. He'd crawled through worse, he told himself, and began the long journey back. The sun was high when Clara spotted him from the garden. She dropped her hoe and ran, skirts hiked up, face white with fear. What happened? Jed, your leg. Twisted it. Nothing serious. But the sweat on his face and the way he couldn't put weight on it said otherwise. Stubborn fool, she muttered, getting under his arm to support him. Together they made it to the house, Jed trying not to lean too heavily, Clara bearing his weight without complaint. Inside, she settled him in a chair and knelt to work his boot off. He hissed as she exposed the ankle, already purple and swollen to twice its size. This needs the doctor. It needs wrapping and rest, nothing more. She gave him a look that could have scorched paint. Fine, have it your way, but you're not moving from this chair until I say so. She fetched water, clean cloths, and the bottle of whiskey he kept for emergencies. Her hands were gentle but firm as she cleaned the scrapes from his fall, wrapped the ankle tight with torn strips of linen. When she started unbuttoning his wet shirt, he caught her wrist. I can manage. No, you can't. She brushed his hand aside, continuing with the buttons. You're soaked through and shivering. unless you want lung fever on top of a broken ankle. He submitted to her ministrations, trying not to think about the intimacy of it. Her fingers on his skin, the way she bit her lip in concentration, the tenderness in her touch. She helped him out of the wet shirt, wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, then started on the more complicated matter of his trousers. "Clara, oh, for heaven's sake!" But her cheeks were pink. "I was married. It's nothing I haven't seen before. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" She sat back on her heels, looking up at him. "We're past pretending, aren't we? Past acting like there's nothing between us." He had no answer for that. She helped him change into dry clothes with brisk efficiency, but he felt the tremor in her hands, saw the way she carefully kept her eyes averted. When he was decent again, she busied herself making tea, her back to him. "You could have died out there," she said quietly, "if you'd hit your head in the fall, if the cold had taken you before you made it back. But I didn't." She turned, and he saw tears on her cheeks. "I can't lose anyone else. Do you understand? I can't find another person I've come to—" She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. "Come to what?" "Care for, depend on, need." Each word seemed pulled from her. "I told myself I was just grateful, just earning my keep, but that's not true anymore." "Is it?" "No," he agreed softly. "It's not." She brought him the tea, then sat on the floor beside his chair, her head resting against his knee. He stroked her hair, marveling at the softness of it, at the trust implicit in the gesture. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. "In a week, Carver will come back. I have no proof to give him. They'll make me leave. Then we'll go to town tomorrow. Send telegraphs. There has to be some record somewhere." "And if there isn't," he was quiet for a long moment, "then we'll face that when it comes." They spent the day in quiet companionship. Clara read to him from one of Sarah's books while he rested his ankle. As evening fell, she made supper, insisting he stay seated. The domesticity of it, her at the stove, him watching from his chair, felt both foreign and utterly right. That night, she made up a pallet on the floor beside his chair, refusing to leave him alone. "In case you need something in the night," she said, but they both knew it was more than that. He woke in the small hours to find her sitting up, arms wrapped around her knees, crying quietly. "What is it?" "I'm scared." The admission came out small and broken. "I've been alone so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have something to lose again. Come here." She looked up at him, uncertain. He held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she rose and let him pull her onto his lap, careful of his injured ankle. She curled against him like a child seeking comfort, and he held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I won't let them take you away," he murmured against her temple. "Whatever it takes, you're staying. You can't promise that. Watch me." She lifted her head to look at him, and the space between them crackled with possibility. In the dim light from the banked fire, her eyes were luminous, full of fear and hope and something deeper. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away the tear tracks. "Jed," she breathed, and it was question and answer all at once. He kissed her, different from that desperate collision in the barn. This was slower, deeper, a claiming and a promise. She made a soft sound against his mouth, her fingers curling into his hair. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We shouldn't," she whispered, but didn't pull away. "I know. Your ankle." "Hang my ankle." That surprised a laugh from her, quickly smothered against his shoulder. They stayed that way, holding each other in the darkness, balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. "If we do this," Clara said finally, "there's no going back. Even if I find proof, even if the town accepts my story, we'll know. We'll have crossed a line. Lines were made to be crossed by people brave enough to want something better on the other side." She was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she spoke, so soft he almost missed it. "I loved Samuel, truly, but it was a quiet love, steady and safe. This—" She pressed a hand to his chest. feeling his heartbeat. This feels like standing in a lightning storm. Is that good or bad? I don't know. Both, maybe. She shifted, wincing. Your poor leg. I should... Stay, please. So she did, curled against him in the chair while the fire died to embers. They didn't make love that night. His injury and their own uncertainties held them back from that final step. But something shifted between them in those dark hours. A recognition that whatever happened with the town, with Carver, with the gossiping neighbors, they had already chosen each other. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it all the complications of the waking world. Clara stirred, blushing to find herself still in his arms. I should start breakfast. In a minute. She relaxed against him again, and he thought about Sarah, wondered if she would understand. He'd loved his wife with everything in him, but that man had died in the fire with her. The man he was now, scarred, wary, but somehow still capable of feeling, belonged to this moment, this woman, this second chance he'd never thought to want. I'll go to town today, Clara said. Send those telegraphs, maybe visit the church records. We'll go together. You can barely walk. Then you'll drive the wagon. But we face this together. She kissed him softly, a seal on the promise. Together, then, the sun rose over the mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. In a week, their fate would be decided one way or another. But for now, they had this, the warmth of connection, the hope of love, and the courage to reach for happiness despite the odds against them. Clara rose to start the day, and Jed watched her move about the kitchen, marveling at how natural she looked there, how right, whatever came next. He knew with bone-deep certainty that he would fight to keep her, not because he needed someone to cook and clean, but because she had brought him back to life, and having tasted that resurrection, he would not willingly return to the grave. The clock on the mantel ticked away the minutes, counting down to Judgment Day. But in the morning light, with Clara humming softly as she worked and his ankle already feeling better, Jed allowed himself to hope that somehow, against all odds, they would find a way through. The telegraphs yielded nothing. For 3 days, Clara haunted the telegraph office while Jed's ankle healed, sending queries to every town between Montana and Kansas. The church in Topeka where Samuel had preached burned down the previous year, taking all records with it. The courthouse in Lawrence had no record of their marriage. They'd been married in a small township that apparently kept poor documentation. Each negative response felt like another nail in a coffin. On the 4th day, Jed found Clara in the barn, sobbing into Buttercup's mane. The gentle mare stood patient while Clara's shoulders shook with the force of her despair. It's over, she said when she saw him. I've tried everything. No one remembers us. It's like we never existed at all. Come to the house. He held out his hand. We need to talk. She followed him inside, where he'd laid out coffee and the last of the apple pies she'd made 2 days ago. She stared at the domestic scene, fresh tears spilling over. Don't you see? In 3 days, I'll have to leave. This will all be just a memory. No. He pulled out her chair, waited until she sat. I've made a decision. Jed, hear me out. He sat across from her, reached for her hands. I've been thinking. About Sarah, about you, about what matters and what doesn't. And I realized something. I've been so focused on the past, on grief, on guilt, on what I lost, that I nearly missed what's right in front of me. What are you saying? I'm saying that I went to visit Sarah's grave yesterday. He felt her hands tense in his. First time since the anniversary. I sat there a long time, talking to her like I used to. Told her about you, about how you showed up half frozen and proud as a queen, about how you've brought life back to this place. Jed, please. And I swear I heard her, clear as day. Not her voice exactly, but her presence, like she was giving permission, like she was saying it's all right to let go. He squeezed her hands. So that's what I'm doing. I'm letting go, and I'm choosing you. Clara pulled her hands free, stood abruptly. You don't know what you're saying. The whole town will turn against you. You'll lose business, respect, everything. Clara Whitmore. He stood too, catching her shoulders. Will you marry me? The words hung in the air between them. Clara's mouth opened, closed, opened again. What? You heard me. I'm asking you to be my wife. Not because I have to, not because the town demands it, but because I want to. Because I can't imagine going back to the emptiness after knowing what it's like to have you here. But I can't prove I'm a widow. In the eyes of the law. Hang the law. We'll go to Reverend Mills tomorrow. He's a good man, knows me, knows I wouldn't ask this lightly. If there are complications later, we'll face them together. Jed. Her voice broke on his name. I'm not Sarah. I'll never be Sarah. I'm not asking you to be. He cupped her face in his hands. I'm asking you to be Clara. To keep making terrible coffee that somehow tastes perfect. To scold me when I track mud inside. To sing off key when you think I can't hear. To be stubborn and proud and stronger than any woman has a right to be. She was crying freely now. I don't have anything to bring to a marriage. No dowry, no family, not even a decent dress. You have yourself. That's all I want. You barely know me. What if I'm not who you think? What if... He silenced her with a kiss, pouring all his certainty into the contact. When they parted, both were shaking. I know enough, he said firmly. I know you fought to survive when it would have been easier to give up. I know you work harder than any two people. I know you've got more courage in your little finger than most men have in their whole bodies. And I know that when I think about the future now. I can't see it without you. Clara searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, finding none. She whispered, You'd really marry me? Knowing what people will say? Let them talk themselves hoarse. Won't change anything. He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Besides, I already punched Ramsey. Might as well make it worth the scandal. That surprised a watery laugh from her. You're insane. Maybe, but I'm also right. We belong together. Clara, maybe not the way we belonged with the ones we lost, but in a new way, a way that's just ours. She was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words. Then, with a deep breath, she nodded. Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Jed Hartwell. God help us both. He whooped like a boy, catching her around the waist and spinning her until they were both dizzy. She laughed, the sound bright as bells in the quiet house. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. Tomorrow, he asked. The sooner the better, before you come to your senses. No chance of that. They spent the evening in a daze of planning. Clara insisted on wearing Sarah's wedding dress. She'd want it used for happiness, not moldering in a trunk. While Jed polished his father's silver watch, the one thing of value he'd planned to pass to his children. That night, with the decision made, the air between them crackled with anticipation. They sat by the fire, closer than usual, hands touching, pulling back, touching again. I should tell you, Clara said softly, about Samuel, about our marriage. You don't have to. I want to. You should know. She stared into the flames. He was a good man, kind, patient, devoted to his calling, but he was careful with affection, proper. He believed in restraint in all things, including the marriage bed. Jed felt heat rise in his face. Clara, I need you to know that I'm not experienced in passion. What happened between us the other night, that feeling, it's new to me. She met his eyes. You make me feel things I didn't know were possible. It frightens me. We'll go slow, he promised, though his blood was singing at her admission. We've got time to learn each other. Do we? She shifted closer. We're getting married tomorrow night. We'll be expected to be husband and wife in all ways. Expected by who? This is our marriage, our choice. We'll move at whatever pace feels right. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, but with heat beneath it. When they parted, her eyes were dark with something that made his breath catch. What if I don't want to go slow? Clara, I've spent 2 years feeling nothing but grief. You've made me feel alive again. Not just grateful, not just safe, but alive. Like my skin finally fits again. Like I want things I'd forgotten how to want. She pressed a hand to his chest. Is that wrong? No, God, no. He covered her hand with his. I feel it too, like I've been sleepwalking and suddenly woke up. They sat in charged silence, the fire crackling between them and tomorrow rushing toward them with all its promises and complications. I should go to bed, Clara said finally, though she made no move to rise. Big day tomorrow. Biggest. Are you sure, Jed? Really sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She smiled, radiant, even in the firelight. Then I'll see you at the church. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. She rose, bent to kiss his forehead. Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for being brave enough to try again. Thank you for showing up in my barn, for refusing to let me waste away, for being too stubborn to give up. We're a pair, aren't we? That we are. She went to her makeshift bed, and he to his room, but neither slept much. The house seemed to hum with anticipation, with the promise of new beginnings. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Ramsey's anger, the town's gossip, the legal complications of Clara's undocumented past. But tonight, with the decision made and their course set, they could simply be two people who'd found each other against all odds. In the morning, Jed dressed in his best clothes, the ones he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, now repurposed for a beginning instead of an ending. He heard Clara moving about, humming nervously. When she emerged in Sarah's dress, altered to fit her taller frame, he felt his throat close with emotion. How do I look? She smoothed the cream-colored silk nervously. Perfect. Liar, but a sweet one. She moved to him, adjusted his collar with wifely familiarity. Ready? Been ready since the day you told me you could cook, clean, and keep warm. She laughed, bright and free. Then let's go get married, Mr. Hartwell. After you, soon to be Mrs. Hartwell. They walked out into the spring morning, toward the wagon, toward town, toward a future neither had expected but both now embraced. Behind them, the little ranch house waited, ready to shelter not just two broken people healing in solitude, but a married couple building something new from the ashes of the past. The sun climbed higher, blessing their journey with light. And if Sarah's spirit lingered near the cottonwood tree on the hill, she surely smiled to see her husband choosing life over living death, choosing love over perpetual grief. Sometimes the greatest honor to the dead was to fully embrace being alive. Spring exploded across the Montana landscape with wildflowers and warming winds. Clara stood in her garden, hands deep in the rich soil, planting seeds with the careful attention of someone planting hope itself. 3 months married, and still she sometimes touched the simple gold band on her finger, making sure it was real. The town had accepted their marriage with varying degrees of grace. Reverend Mills had performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, while Ramsey and his ilk muttered darkly about impropriety. But as the weeks passed and Clara proved herself through sheer hard work and dignity, most of the whispers died down. She'd even made a friend in Martha Brennan, the schoolteacher, who stopped by weekly for tea and gossip. You're humming again, Jed observed, leaning against the garden gate. Clara looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. Am I? I hadn't noticed. You always hum when you're content. Off-key is a rusty gait, but I've grown fond of it. She threw a clod of dirt at him, laughing when he dodged dramatically. Keep that up and you'll be cooking your own supper. Empty threats, Mrs. Hartwell. You couldn't stand to watch me burn beans again. The easy banter still felt like a miracle sometimes. They'd found their rhythm as husband and wife, working side by side during the day, sharing meals and conversation. And at night, Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks thinking of the nights. Jed had been patient, gentle, teaching her that passion could be tender as well as fierce. She'd discovered a side of herself she'd never known existed, a woman who could want and be wanted without shame. I need to go to town, she said, brushing dirt from her hands. We're low on flour and coffee. I'll come with you. You don't have to protect me from gossip anymore. I'm a respectable married woman now. Remember? Maybe I just like being seen with my wife. She smiled, the expression lighting her whole face. Then by all means, Mr. Hartwell, escort away. In town, Clara moved with new confidence, greeting neighbors, conducting business at the general store with friendly efficiency. She'd earned her place here through determination and Jed's unwavering support. When Agnes Murphy invited her to join the church quilting circle, Clara accepted with genuine pleasure. They were loading supplies when Doc Morrison approached, his face grave. Mrs. Hartwell. Jed, glad I caught you. Doc. Jed nodded. Something wrong? Not wrong, exactly. But there's a woman at my office. Showed up this morning in bad shape, exhausted, half-starved, scared out of her wits. Won't say what happened, but... He looked at Clara meaningfully. I thought you might be able to help. Woman to woman. Clara's hand found Jed's. They both knew what it was like to be desperate and alone. Of course. We'll come now. The woman huddled in Doc Morrison's office was young, maybe 20, with a kind of prettiness that had probably caused her more trouble than joy. Her dress was torn, her feet bleeding through worn shoes, and she held herself with the careful stillness of someone expecting a blow. Hello, Clara said gently, sitting beside her. I'm Clara Hartwell. This is my husband Jed. Doc Morrison thought we might be able to help. The woman's eyes darted between them, lingering on Clara's respectable dress, her wedding ring. I can't pay. No one's asking you to. What's your name? Rose Campbell. The name came out reluctantly, as if she wasn't sure she had the right to it anymore. Are you hungry, Rose? Thirsty? A nod, quick and ashamed. Clara poured water from the pitcher, held it while Rose's shaking hands guided it to her lips. Better? At Rose's nod, Clara continued. I know what it's like to be where you are, to have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. 2 years ago, I showed up at Jed's ranch in the middle of a blizzard, half dead and fully desperate. He took me in, gave me work and shelter when he had every reason to turn me away. Rose's eyes widened. You? Me. So whatever brought you here, whatever you're running from, we're not here to judge, just to help if we can. The story came out in halting pieces. Rose had been a saloon girl in Billings, not what people might assume. She insisted fiercely. Just serving drinks and keeping lonely cowboys company for conversation. But the saloon owner's son had taken a fancy to her. Wouldn't accept no for an answer. When she'd fought him off, he'd beaten her and thrown her out, warning her never to show her face in Billings again. I walked for days, she whispered. Slept in barns when I could find them. Begged for food. I just wanted to get far enough away that he couldn't find me. Clara looked at Jed, saw her own thoughts reflected in his face. They'd talked about this, late at night when the house felt too big for just 2 people. About paying forward the grace they'd been given. Rose, Clara said carefully, how would you feel about staying with us for a while? We've got room and plenty of work if you're willing. It would give you time to rest, to figure out your next steps without pressure. I couldn't. People would talk. Say you're harboring a... She couldn't finish the sentence. Let them talk, Jed said firmly. They talked about Clara too, and now she's teaching their children Sunday school. Good people recognize good people, regardless of circumstances. Rose started crying then, great gulping sobs of relief and exhaustion. Clara gathered her close, making soothing sounds while Jed went to arrange things with Doc Morrison. They took Rose home that day, setting her up in the small room off the kitchen that had once been a pantry. Clara found her clothes that would fit, drew her a hot bath, and made sure she ate a proper meal. Through it all, Rose watched them with something like wonder, as if kindness without strings attached was a foreign language she was slowly learning to understand. That night, as Clara and Jed lay entwined in their bed, she traced patterns on his chest and smiled. What? He asked, catching her hand. I was just thinking, 6 months ago. You were a hermit who barely spoke, and I was a desperate widow with nothing. Now look at us, married, happy, taking in strays like we're building an orphanage. Any regrets? Not a one. She kissed him softly. Though I do have something to tell you, something I've suspected for a while now, but wanted to be sure. Oh? He tensed slightly, worry creeping into his voice. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the darkness for a heartbeat. 2, 3. Then Jed was sitting up, lighting the lamp with shaking hands. You're sure? As sure as a woman can be. I've missed my monthly twice now, and there's been sickness in the mornings. I wanted to wait to tell you until I was certain. Clara. Her name came out reverent, prayerful. His hand moved to her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. A baby. Are you happy? Happy? He laughed, the sound thick with emotion. I thought I'd lost my chance at fatherhood. Thought that part of my life died with Emma, but you... He cupped her face in his hands. You keep giving me pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. We're having a baby, Clara whispered, the reality of it hitting her fully. Oh, Jed, what if something happens? What if I'm not strong enough? The doctor in Kansas said after losing the first one, I might not be able to... Hey. He pulled her close, stroking her hair. We'll take it day by day. Doc Morrison is the best there is, and you're the strongest woman I know. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Promise? I promise. You and me and this little one. We're a family now. Nothing's going to change that. They held each other in the lamplight. Two people who'd thought their chances at happiness were buried with their first loves, now building something new and precious from the ashes. Outside, the spring night sang with crickets and distant coyotes, the endless music of the living world. In the morning, Clara would tell Rose their news, and the young woman would cry again, this time with joy for the couple who'd saved her. She'd throw herself into helping prepare for the baby, finding purpose in being needed. The house that had once echoed with grief would fill with women's voices, planning and hoping. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, there was just Jed and Clara and the tiny spark of life growing between them, a future neither had dared dream of, now taking root with all the stubborn persistence of prairie grass after a fire. Clara began to hum, off-key as always, and Jed pulled her closer, thinking that he'd never heard a more beautiful sound. Sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as losses, and sometimes a widow seeking shelter from a storm could bring with her the seeds of spring. The lamp burned low as they talked in whispers about names and nurseries, about the child who would know only love and safety, who would grow up with parents who understood that every day of happiness was a gift to be treasured. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the window, the world continued its ancient dance of endings and beginnings, of death and rebirth, of love lost and love found. By summer, Clara's condition would be obvious, her belly rounding with promise. By fall, the house would echo with a baby's cry, strong and healthy despite all fears. But on this spring night, there was only the quiet joy of two people who'd saved each other, now creating a life that would be testament to the power of second chances. The first pain came just after midnight, sharp enough to wake Clara from restless sleep. October rain drummed against the windows, and the wind howled like a living thing around the corners of the house. She lay still, hand pressed to her swollen belly, waiting. When the second pain came, stronger and sooner than she'd expected, she knew. Jed. She shook his shoulder gently. It's time. He came awake instantly, a skill learned from years of ranching. The baby? Yes. Can you send Rose for Doc Morrison? Rose, who'd become like a sister these past months, was already up and dressing when Jed knocked on her door. She'd been through this vigil before with other women and knew the signs. I'll saddle Buttercup and go now, she said, calm and efficient. You stay with Clara. The storm made travel dangerous. But Rose didn't hesitate. She'd found her courage in this house, transformed from frightened runaway to capable woman. Within minutes, she was gone into the night. Clara's labor progressed quickly, too quickly. The pains came in waves that left her gasping, clutching Jed's hand until her knuckles went white. "Something's wrong," she panted between contractions. "With my first, it wasn't like this. The pain. Doc will be here soon." Jed wiped her face with a cool cloth, fighting to keep his voice steady. Inside, terror clawed at him. He'd lost Sarah to complications after Emma's birth, infection that took her within days. He couldn't lose Clara, too. Not when they'd built this life together. Not when she'd brought him back from the dead. The hours crawled by. Clara grew weaker with each contraction, her face gray with exhaustion and pain. When Doc Morrison finally arrived, soaked to the skin and grim-faced, he took one look at her and started barking orders. "Baby's turned wrong," he said after a quick examination. "Going to have to try to turn it, or we'll lose them both." "Do whatever you have to do," Jed said roughly. "Just save her. I'll do my best to save them both." What followed was a nightmare of pain and blood and Clara's weakening cries. Rose boiled water and tore sheets for bandages while Jed held his wife, murmuring encouragement and prayers in equal measure. The storm raged outside, echoing the battle being fought in the small bedroom. "I can't," Clara gasped, her strength nearly gone. "I'm sorry. Jed, I tried. Don't you dare give up." He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You hear me? Clara Hartwell, you're the strongest woman I know. You survived losing everything and walked through a blizzard to find me. You're not giving up now. The baby will need its mother. Fight! Clara, please!" Something in his desperate plea reached her. With effort that seemed superhuman, she rallied for one final push. The room filled with a thin, reedy cry, the most beautiful sound Jed had ever heard. "It's a boy," Doc Morrison announced, quickly cleaning the infant, small but breathing well. But Clara was too still, too pale. Blood soaked the sheets despite the doctor's efforts. Her eyes fluttered closed, and her hand went limp in Jed's grip. "Clara, Clara!" Panic seized him. "Doc, I'm doing everything I can." Morrison worked frantically, packing the bleeding, checking her pulse. "She's lost a lot of blood. The next few hours will tell." They moved her to clean sheets, washed her gently, and wrapped her in warm blankets. The baby, swaddled tightly, was placed in the cradle Jed had built with his own hands. Rose took charge of the infant while Jed kept vigil at Clara's bedside. She lay still as death, only the shallow rise and fall of her chest showing she still lived. Jed held her hand, talking to her in a low, constant murmur, about the baby, about the ranch, about all the years they'd have together if she'd just stay with him. "Remember when you first came here?" he said, voice hoarse. "Proud as a queen, even half frozen. You told me you could cook and clean and keep warm, but you gave me so much more. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. You gave me hope when I thought I'd never feel anything but grief again. Don't leave me now. Clara, please." Dawn came gray and watery. The storm finally spent. Clara hadn't stirred, her face waxen in the pale light. Doc Morrison checked her again, frowning. "I've done all I can. It's up to her now." "She'll make it," Jed said fiercely. "She has to." Rose brought the baby, hoping the sound of his cry might rouse Clara. The infant was tiny but perfect, with a shock of dark hair like his mother's. Jed held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face. "Look what we made. Clara," he whispered. "He needs you. I need you. Come back to us." As if in response to his plea, Clara's eyelashes fluttered. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing with effort on Jed's face. The baby. Her voice was barely a breath. Perfect. A son. Small but strong, like his mother. Can I see him?" They placed the baby on her chest, supporting him carefully since she was too weak to hold him alone. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she looked at her son, one trembling finger touching his tiny face. "He's beautiful. He needs a name," Jed said softly. Clara was quiet for a moment, then smiled. Samuel James Hartwell, for the men who gave me the strength to find you. Samuel it is." The days that followed were touch and go. Clara developed fever, and for a terrifying night, they thought they'd lose her after all. But she fought with the same stubborn determination that had carried her through blizzards and loss, and slowly, painfully, she began to heal. Rose proved invaluable, caring for baby Samuel while Clara recovered, keeping the household running smoothly. She'd found her calling in nurturing others, and there was talk of her starting a boarding house in town for women who needed shelter and a fresh start with the Hartwells' backing. Of course. By November, Clara was strong enough to sit in the rocking chair by the window, nursing Samuel while watching the first snow of winter drift down. Jed came in from feeding the cattle to find them there, Madonna and child framed by frost-etched glass. "How are my two miracles?" he asked, kissing Clara's forehead. "Hungry, in Samuel's case. Content, in mine." She smiled up at him. "Though I could use some of that stew Rose is making. It smells like heaven. I'll bring you a bowl." He paused, struck by the simple perfection of the moment. "I love you, Clara. Have I told you that today?" Only a dozen times. Her eyes sparkled with the old spirit that had first caught his attention. But I never tire of hearing it. That evening, they sat together by the fire, Jed in his chair, Clara in the rocker with Samuel, Rose working on plans for her boarding house. The home that had once echoed with loneliness now hummed with life and purpose. "We've come so far," Clara mused, watching Samuel's sleeping face. "A year ago, I was alone and desperate. Now look at us. A family." Jed agreed. "Bigger and stranger than I ever imagined, but ours. The best kind," Rose added with a smile. "The kind you choose." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, but inside, warmed by fire and love and the promise of all the years to come. 3 adults and 1 tiny baby formed a circle of light against the darkness. Clara began to hum, still off-key, still perfect, and Samuel stirred in his sleep, making small, contented noises. Jed reached over to take her free hand, marveling at how a chance encounter in a blizzard had led to this moment of perfect peace. In the spring, they would plant a larger garden. By summer, Samuel would be crawling, exploring his world with fearless curiosity. Other women would find their way to the ranch, seeking the same shelter and second chance Clara had been given. The house would ring with laughter and arguments and the beautiful chaos of lives being rebuilt. But that was all to come. For now, there was this, a family forged from loss and found in love. Proof that even the harshest winter must yield to spring. The widow who'd arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back had become the heart of a home, the center of a world rebuilt from ashes. And in the rocking chair by the window, Clara Hartwell sang her son to sleep with lullabies off-key and full of joy, while the man who'd saved her and the woman they'd saved in turn kept watch. Together, they faced the future with hope born from sorrow transformed. The fire crackled, the baby slept, and life, in all its messy, painful, glorious complexity, went on. Thank you for listening to this story of love and redemption in the Old West. We'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale from. Please comment below and let us know. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel From Wild West for more stories of romance, adventure, and second chances on the frontier. Share your thoughts about Clara and Jed's journey in the comments. What touched your heart the most? We can't wait to hear from you.